Good morning, good evening, and good day, viewers of our usual weekly program, Straight Talk. Let me welcome you once again in the new year as we move inexorably towards March the 2nd. The 2020 elections campaign is now in full swing. And all the political parties are out there campaigning to win votes or to win back votes. Nominations day is over. It's almost 1 week now from today when the political parties made their presentations to GCOP. There were quite a large number of parties, maybe about 19 of them. Now it has reduced to 9 political parties that will be contesting the elections. And these parties were warned about the challenges to contest elections in Guyana and the constraints that they will face, not only to prepare themselves toward the submission of candidates, but also in terms of winning votes and creating a base for themselves within the larger Guyanese population. And so, with the numbers having been reduced from 19 to 9, it still means that there's a lot of work out there to be done in order to attract the attention of voters. So that the campaign now is in full swing. And I would like to take this opportunity to point to what I consider to be 12 major issues that are being debated during the course of the campaign at the public meetings of the political parties. The 12 issues that are being debated, to my mind, are as follows. Issues pertaining to governance. Governance is an extremely important issue because it has to do with the whole question of democracy, the fundamental rights of the Guyanese people as enshrined in the Constitution of our country as well as in the United Nations Charter. These fundamental rights are extremely important for all sections of the population, and therefore the way the government governs the country is an extremely important matter that most of the political parties are debating now publicly in the course of their campaign. We have noted that in the context of the governance of the APNU AFC, there is a creeping tendency towards a dictatorship. We have been there before, and we have fought against a dictatorship. We have won that battle, but it seems as though the dictatorship tendencies are once again surfacing or rearing its ugly head, and therefore it means we have to enjoin the battle once again. Another issue that is being debated in the course of the campaign is the question of track records. There's a contest between the two principal parties, the APNU and the AFC, and the PPPC, in respect of their records of governance or their track records in the various fields in the economic and social sectors, for example in health, education, the financing of projects in the country, and so forth. Now this is also an extremely important matter that is being debated. And when we look at the track record, particularly of the government, which had been in office for almost 5 years, beginning from May 2015, it is as though nothing existed before for the past 23 years when the PPPC was in office. Now this is an impossible argument. How can a government that has just been in power or just been in office for 5 years outdo or diminish, so to speak, the accomplishments of the country, not of the party, but the accomplishments of the country over 23 years. These accomplishments have been acknowledged by the Caribbean Development Bank, by the World Bank, by the Inter-American Development Bank, by the Caribbean community, and many other international stakeholders who from time to time would visit Guyana to make assessments of how money is being spent, and that is public money as well as money from the donor community and international financial institutions. So that because these organizations and stakeholders have from time to time monitored the progress being made under the PPPC government, there is no way that that can be eliminated by history or by the APNU-AFC, which has been in government for just 5 years. So that's the first point I'd like to make in respect to track records. The other point I'd like to make on the question of track records is when you look at the massive investments in public sector that was made by the People's Progressive Party Civic in this country, infrastructure, in the services sector, in the manufacturing sector with the help of the private sector, and so forth, it can pale what the APNU-AFC is speaking about, pales into insignificance in respect to what was done over the past 23 years. We look around and we see that most of the projects which they are currently implementing are projects that were already in the pipeline, funded by international financial institutions or by the Chinese or by the Indians or by as a result of some multilateral or bilateral lending agency that are currently being implemented. So that the comparison with respect to track records and implementation and realization of projects is like chalk to cheese when you compare what the APNU-AFC is claiming that they have done compared to the 23 years of the PPPC administration. And incidentally, I may make this point, it is precisely because of the growth in the economy, it was precisely because of the large amount of money, what is called disposable income for individuals and families, which they have been deprived of, that many people, thousands of Guyanese, are now demanding a return of the PPPC to office. People now are totally fed up with the APNU-AFC. Had they been pleased, the response would have been completely different, but that is not the case. But let us move on. Another of the issues that are being discussed publicly in the course of the current campaign is the issue of corruption. Now, my friends, this has been a very topical issue ever since the APNU-AFC came into office. There were allegations of corruption when the PPPC was in office. I would not gainsay that. But the fact of the matter is, with the establishment of SARA and KANU and SANU, the fact of the matter is, none of the persons who the APNU-AFC government claimed were involved in some corrupt transactions, none of them have been charged or taken before the courts. So that the question of corruption also, when compared to the PPP and the PNC or APNU-AFC governments, is one that has, so to speak, turned off a lot of Guyanese. We have many examples to refer to. The famous Durban Park Stadium, the drug bonds issue, the Marriott Hotel money disappearing, or the question of the casino that was supposed to have been negotiated. And there are many, many other projects which have come under scrutiny currently by many organizations and by many of the stakeholders who are watching what is going on. So the corruption scandals are so huge that it is impossible for the government to climb out of this huge pile of corrupt practices that has accumulated over the years. The other issue that is being discussed in the course of the current campaign is the question of oil and gas. Who will be the beneficiaries of oil and gas and the benefits that will flow, the revenue that will flow from the petroleum sector? The private sector is up in arms because they're not satisfied based on the attitude of the government on the question of their participation in local content issues. The political parties, particularly the PPPC, is also not satisfied because of the lack of transparency and accountability that has dogged the whole policies of the government in respect to the oil and gas issues. The other issue that is being debated of great importance is the question of crime. It is generally acknowledged that the crime situation has ballooned completely out of control. Not only the crimes that are reported, but the unreported crimes, where people suffer losses of property, have their homes burgled, and so forth. But they do not report it because the general impression that they have is that nothing comes out of it and the police takes no action. And instead of going after the criminals, the police goes after the victims. And as a result, people tend not to report a lot of crimes that are committed to affect their livelihoods. So that the crime issue, notwithstanding the fact that before the APNUFC came into office, they claimed that they had all the answers to crime and crime fighting, and that they had the experts, mainly the president himself, who was an expert on fighting crime. But that notwithstanding, the fact of the matter is today, Guyana still is dogged by many serious crimes. We go further. In the course of the campaign, another issue that is being debated is the question of the implications of the no confidence motion in the National Assembly. We have spoken extensively on this, and there's been a lot of news and information on the question of the no confidence motion and how the APNUFC government have sought to get what is called a get out of jail card in order to escape the consequences and the rulings of the Caribbean Court of Justice in respect to the no confidence motion. They have trampled on the Constitution. They've spoken about their commitment to upholding the principles of the Constitution. But in actuality, it was a completely different story. But as they say, the longest rope has an end, and now we are approaching March 2nd for the jury to pronounce on who they wish to run this country or to administer the affairs of Guyana for the next 5 years. We go on further on the questions that are being debated in the course of the elections campaign. One of them is the question of national development. The government, in a cynical and barefaced way, has come forward informing the people that they have a 10-year development plan. Well, you know, in many countries, you can have development plans. It's okay and it's not difficult to draw a development plan, but you have to have what is called developmental economists. I do not know, having been in Guyana for all these years, who are the developmental economists in Guyana who can formulate a national development plan for 10 years for the ruling party. So that this development plan which we hear is being discussed and being promoted by the speakers at APNU AFC rallies is something that we have to take not only with a pinch of salt, but with a whole dabu of salt. Because, like I said, formulating a plan is easy. implementing the plan is where we will have serious problems and difficulties. The other issue that is being debated in the question on the course of the elections campaign is the question of race. Now, this is a very sensitive issue, and not many people, I should say, are interested in the race question being introduced in the course of the issues that are being campaigned. But here comes one of the speakers at one of the APNU-AFC rallies and decides to describe the prime ministerial candidate of the PPPC as a representative of black tokenism. My friends, this was a totally uncalled for appendage to the prime ministerial candidate of the PPPC. By calling him or describing him as a person representing black tokenism in the PPPC, we believe, and I personally believe, that not only was it uncalled for, it was a reflection of the psychology and the philosophy, which is ethnic base that exists within the APNU-AFC. And so we ask the question, if Mr. Phillips, the Brigadier Phillips, is representative of black tokenism in the APNU-AFC, then what is Mr. Ubraj Narain and many other Indians in the APNU-AFC? What are they? Because you can have black tokenism, you can also have Indian tokenism. So if they want to go down that road, I want to suggest that it's an extremely dangerous road to go down, and many people would not find it something digestible at all. The manifestos are also being debated in the course of the elections campaign. The APNU-AFC have not so far published a manifesto, and so it's a big mystery. They claim that they're holding back for some reason or the other, which we don't know. But at least the PPPC has made a manifesto public, and that is precisely what the speakers at PPPC meetings are seeking to base their conversations with the listeners on. That is what PPPC members are promoting at the rallies, because the manifesto is in fact a commitment in the economic, social, and political sphere, which, if winning the elections, the political party is expected to implement. As we go on, question as the constitutional reform is also being discussed. This is something that is being promoted principally by some of the smaller political parties. They want constitutional reform in order to make space for them to have a bigger say in the issues affecting the country. They want to have a larger position in the question of the electoral process in the country. They feel that the electoral process is not one that encourages the participation of small parties. And finally, they talk about constitutional reform because for them it means a change in the form of governance to bring about some element of inclusivity in the governance of the country. There's also the question of public safety and security. This is an extremely important issue that is being debated in the course of the campaign. The PPPC had very strong views on the question of public safety and security because they've had 23 years in this sector and they have performed creditably in this sector as well. Lo and behold, with the change of government and with the insertion of the Halia As minister in the public safety and security sector, clearly that sector has gone down, has been reduced to almost nothing. The test will come, however, in the course of this campaign and on election day for us to really get a feel, although we have one already, of how effective the public safety and security sector will be on election day were there to be any troubles or any disturbances arising from the announcement of the results. So, finally, one of the issues that is being debated, and this is more or less on the lighter note, so to speak, is who will lock up who. One side is saying who they will lock up, and another side is saying who they will lock up as well. But on the side of the APNU AFC, when they're talking about locking up, they were speaking about that long before 2015. 5 years have passed. Nobody has been locked up so far. Clearly, it was all a question of hot air. And as Mr. Jagdo at his recent press conference pointed out, Mr. Moses Nagamutu, the Minister of Information, who's been talking a lot about this locking up issue, seemed to be blowing up more greenhouse gases insofar as his references to locking up is concerned. When it comes to the PPPC, however, the PPPC claims that it has incontrovertible evidence in order to deal with crimes committed under the APNU AFC government, economic and financial crimes that have been committed under the APNU AFC government during their tenure in office, and they have in their back pockets plans to address this question of illegal activities such as the granting of contracts, etc., to persons who should have not gotten those contracts signed by a government that was mainly a caretaker government. So these are, in my view, some of the more fundamental issues that are being debated in the public domain in the course of the current elections campaign leading up to March the 2nd. There are two issues which do not appear to figure in any way prominently in the course of the campaign. And it is interesting to note these two issues. The first one is international issues. No international issue has figured in any prominent way in the course of the current elections campaign. And that is an interesting point to note. The second issue that has not figured in any prominent way in the course of this campaign is the question of national unity. The political parties do not speak much about these issues, obviously because most of them feel it's not an issue that will attract voters at this point in time when there's such keen competition among themselves to win votes, to get seats in the National Assembly, to take control of the executive branch of government, and to also govern the country as a whole. So these are the issues which I have observed so far. There may be other issues that have come up in the course of the campaign, but the campaign has a far way yet to go, and therefore in our next broadcast we'll definitely deal with those issues. Another issue which I think we need to focus on, and which is being discussed in the course of the campaign, is the wasteful spending of public funds by this government. Recently, they dispatched a big delegation to the United Nations for the handing over of the gavel from Palestine to Guyana. This was totally uncalled for. PPPC government, when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, one time held the chairmanship of G77. The point is not to make this a big PR activity with cameras flashing and photographs all over the place. What is important is working together in such a multilateral setting with a number of countries, more than 77 countries, plus China, to implement programs or to get programs funded that will bring benefits to the countries and the people in those countries represented in the G77 group. But the total waste of resources and finances at this point in time could also be seen in the Auditor General's report, which has just been released unofficially. I do not want to use the word leaked, but I would prefer to say it has been released unofficially. In that Auditor General report, there is a lot of information and revelations of money being spent that was not totally authorized. Billions and billions of dollars being spent and not accounted for. And even today, we find that the government is not adhering to what the Caribbean Court of Justice said that they should do, insofar as not entering or signing off on new contracts over a certain amount of money, so that the splurge on spending has gone completely out of control. We also noticed within recent times, or within recent days as a matter of fact, the politicization of the Guyana police force. Now, many may deny that this is taking place, but as a former Minister of Home Affairs, I understand what is taking place in respect to political interference in the affairs of the Guyana police force. Much will be spoken about this at a later stage, but it's important to alert listeners and viewers to the increasing politicization of the Guyana police force by a government which in the past used to criticize the PPPC for the same thing which they are doing, which the PPPC was not really doing. But they are now doing it, and we're reading it almost on a daily basis in the newspapers. In the course of the campaign, allegations and evidence have been produced showing vandalism and hooliganism on the part of APNU-AFC supporters. Now, during the election campaign, all the political parties, irrespective of size or resources, have the freedom, or should have the freedom, in or out of elections campaign, to go to any part of the country to spread their message without let or hindrance. They should not be harassed, they should not be intimidated, they should not be physically abused, their paraphernalia should not be ripped down, destroyed, or thrown away. Every political party in the course of this campaign must have the freedom to exercise those rights that come legitimately in the course of a campaign. But we notice an increasing amount of activities on the part of APNU-AFC activists to destroy paraphernalia and to harass and intimidate, and in some cases physically abuse activists of the opposition PPP as they go into various parts of the country. I would like to conclude by welcoming all the elections observers to Guyana, particularly the Carter Center. And I single out the Carter Center because I worked with them in the 1992 elections. They are an incredible set of people. They know the election system quite well. They have a worldwide set of knowledge and experience in other countries and how elections are conducted. And we need to welcome them particularly back to Guyana. President Jimmy Carter has always paid attention to this country. He has a soft spot for Guyana, and he would like to see Guyana on the road to real and true democracy, peace, and social progress. And so all the observers who are here, whether from India, from Africa, from the Caribbean, or wherever, we welcome them, and I particularly welcome them to this country. The internationalization of the electoral process in Guyana is a sine qua non for the holding of free and fair elections. And I believe that they, whether they're from Canada or whichever part of the world, I believe that they will play a positive role, so that all this talk about interference by these observers is totally unnecessary and without merit. There cannot be interference because they have been invited by the government. If they were not invited by the government and were interfering from outside with a non-invitation, that was a totally different matter. But the fact of the matter that they've been invited by the government of Guyana, caretaker or otherwise, they are here on a legitimate basis. They are here to conduct themselves in a way which they've been conducting themselves all around the world, and Guyana will be no exception. So let us look forward, and let us contribute in whatever way we can to ensure that these elections are free and fair and free from fear. I think most Guyanese want to get the elections behind them, but at the same time they also want to make sure that the results of the elections are not only as a result of a free and fair elections, but one that everyone can live with, and so they can move on with their lives, with their business opportunities, with their investment opportunities, with their family, and with their country, so that the world can recognize that Guyana is once again on the path to democracy, peace, and social progress. Thank you very much for watching, and we will be with you once again on our program Straight Talk next week. Goodbye.